Indonesia. Violent protests in Indonesia. Let's see what the Western media is saying about that. This was updated 4 hours ago. Today is September 2nd, 2025, as I'm recording this. Indonesia's deadly protests paused, but deep resentment remains. Here's what to know. Again, these people are coming out. They're burning their country to the ground over what? Over what? What does CNN say they're burning their country down to the ground and killing each other over? Indonesia's worst wave of violent protests in years seems to have come to a pause for now after the government ordered the military and police to take stern action against rioters and looters. And again, they're out literally burning things to the ground. So the police and military, it's their responsibility to stop them. That is not how you solve problems. You don't just go out and just start causing random violence. These people have no plan. They have no clue why they're even out onto on the streets. Honestly, they think they're there to fight government corruption or whatever the vague slogan is that they all are repeating. But that's not why they're out on the streets. They're out on the streets because the US government, through its network of propaganda in Indonesia, set up in the exact same manner it has been set up in Serbia and everywhere else, has convinced them to do so, and has leaders, media, organizations serving as a structure to draw out these people. People always argue with me, Brian, I was in the protests. I wasn't funded. That's how the NED works. They don't need to fund everyone. They just need to fund the leaders that convince you that this is a worthy cause of you going out for free and protesting. That is how it always works. So Indonesia's worst wave of violent protests, some students and civil society groups called off their protests. So it's not spontaneous, it's not organic, it's not grassroots. It is student organizations that are influenced by US programs in the universities all across Indonesia, just like they are here in Thailand, and civil society groups, which is just a euphemism for US NED funded organizations. I will tell you by name what those organizations, some of them, are. So they called their protests off on Monday, so that was yesterday, citing fears of heightened security measures imposed after deadly riots across the country on the weekend, Reuters reported. At least 5 people have been killed in the protests. So again, wait until you find out what this was over and was it worth killing human beings over. It began peacefully over controversial housing perks for lawmakers, but erupted on Thursday when an armored vehicle hit and killed a rideshare driver. But again, what was going on? What was going on? This was what was going on. Violence in the streets, arson, property damage. People, and I've seen it with my own eyes here in Thailand because they did the exact same thing here on multiple occasions. The most recent was 2019 to 2020. They're out there throwing bricks at people's heads. They're burning down private property, also public property. They're lighting police vehicles on fire. They're lighting public buildings on fire. And if anyone in the public says, why are you doing this? You should stop doing this. They'll throw a brick at their head also. I've seen it. I've done entire videos about how this all works. They're doing this over housing perks for lawmakers. I understand that that is a reason to be upset. That is not a reason to go and burn your country to the ground. I understand there are lawmakers taking your tax money. You feel they're not even doing a really good job at all, or even you suspect they're doing a horrible job, and they're taking your tax money and they're giving themselves additional benefits while you feel you're struggling because of their incompetence. Fair enough, you're upset about that. Is that a reason for people to just spontaneously come out of their homes and we all just so happen to gather at this one police station to burn it down? No, that is not how it works. But we get a little clue from CNN. CNN gives us a little hint of who is behind this, because the civil society groups that are running it and called it off temporarily, they get interviewed, they get named. CNN names them. It's buried in the article. They hope you don't make the connection or look into them, but they do name them from time to time. So there's a man named Daniel. He's the representative for the Jakarta Legal Aid Institute. Whenever you hear some organization named like that, you could almost bet anything without even looking into it that it's NED funded. They all have almost identical names. Here in Thailand, they have Thai Lawyers for Human Rights. This is just a copy and pasted Indonesian version of Thai Lawyers for Human Rights. He said much of the discontent centered around the worsening economic hardships for ordinary Indonesians as wages stagnate and living costs rise. So let's all burn our country to the ground. That's how you solve that problem, right? Now, Jakarta Legal Aid Institute has been named in almost every article. If you do a search, you will see their names in CNN, in Reuters, Financial Times. All of these articles cite them specifically because that's how all of these color revolutions work. They're not going to just randomly interview people and do real journalism. They're going to interview the people the US government and European governments are funding to destabilize these countries, because the media also plays a direct role in this. Western media plays a direct role in promoting the local media and local protesting groups that are engaged in US color revolution. So they're always going to cite the Western funded agitators themselves. They're not going to actually do real journalism and interview random people and see, what do people supporting the protest think? What do people opposed to the protest think? And we'll give you an unbiased, balanced view and let you decide. No, they just always interview the US government funded agitators. So what does Jakarta Legal Aid Institute do? They give free legal aid to all of the agitators and protest leaders as they carry out their violent foreign government funded sedition and treason inside Indonesia. That's what they do. Who funds them? If you go to their website, they don't tell you who funds them. And these so-called civil society organizations that want freedom and democracy, always demanding transparency from their respective governments, they themselves exercise almost always zero transparency themselves. As you do a little bit of digging like I did, you will find this Ford Foundation, and all the Ford Foundation is another CIA cutout like the NED itself, and they will fund organizations and movements that the US government itself does not want to be caught funding directly. And so they name it by name, Indonesia Legal Aid Foundation. This is an umbrella group that Jakarta Legal Aid falls under, and this is who they receive their funding from. This is what they claim they're doing: general to promote justice, democracy, and human rights across all layers of society through empowerment of marginalized groups. Again, this idea of identity politics that divide and destroy society, improvement of systems, institutions, and advocacy for legal justice, and core support for institutional strengthening. This is the sovereign business of a nation. No other nation has the right to meddle in this. This is for the people of Indonesia themselves and themselves alone to determine, not the US government, whether it's directly through the National Endowment for Democracy or their fronts like the Ford Foundation. Who else has funded this group? If you go to another archived webpage, this is from 2004, Indonesia Legal Aid Foundation, struggling for democracy and its own sustainability, because this is the problem. When they get found out and exposed, the NED or USAID, whoever was funding them, when they get found out, is like a hot potato. They have to pass it to somebody else. But luckily for the United States, they have a global spanning network of client states that they can pass this hot potato off to. Who gets it? Who gets it after USAID? Novum and USAID no longer provide support. Okay, so they were supporting it. Who does now? Canadian International Development Agency, which is just Canada's USAID, and Australia's Agency for International Development, which is just Australia's USAID. That's who's funding this Indonesian group that all the Western media groups are taking turns citing, and this is one of the groups behind the protests, supporting the protests, literally providing free legal aid to the people engaged in US-sponsored sedition in Indonesia. Now again, just like with Serbia, a way you can figure out what these organizations are doing now specifically regarding the protests is to go look at their social media presence. You go to one of these other fake fronts the US government and European governments are funding, and what is this? Just a moment. I think it's this one. So what is this? This is a demand, stop police brutality. So they're condemning the Indonesian government, they're condemning the Indonesian police, and they have this little letter that they've written, and all of these groups signed it, including the Indonesian Legal Aid Foundation that I was just talking about, that the Western media has been citing regarding the protests. And if you look at this list, some of these I know by name already without even having to look them up, because they're here in Thailand. The Manusia Foundation, it even says right here, Thailand. These are one of the fake fronts funded by the US government here in Thailand, engaged in sedition and treason, essentially treason. You're working for a foreign government to destroy your own country. How else do you put it? It's an ugly word, but what other word can you use? And they even have down here the Milk Tea Alliance. I've done entire videos about the Milk Tea Alliance. That is a US State Department project. That was to Southeast Asia, well, actually Asia in general, what the Arab Spring was to the Arab world. This is a region-wide effort by the State Department to network all of their groups in individual countries together to try to create a wave of chaos, division, and destruction all across Asia. Then you have to ask yourself, why are they doing this? Serbia has a relationship with Russia. The US wants to stop and extinguish completely and completely subordinate it to itself and its European client states. The US wants to destroy all of Southeast Asia, to encircle and contain China, not just with the US military, but with socioeconomic chaos, so that China is isolated and more easily managed by the US as it continues its open confrontation with China itself. So that's why they're doing all of this. And I will put the link to the Milk Tea Alliance video that I have done previously, so you can watch through that. And I have a list of links in the video description of that video where you can go and see all of the evidence. Here, Solidarity Collective. And again, you look up any of these and you will see the US government funding behind all of them. Here's another one. This is on the list. It's called 2030 Youth Force Indonesia, and this is their webpage, 2030 Youth Force Activity. It's a dead giveaway that it's a Western-funded fake front when everything is in English. How is this supposed to appeal to ordinary Indonesians? And the way you figure this out is you look in you gotta be a little bit of a detective, because most of them lie about their foreign funding and they cover it up. But they always go to these events, or they organize these events, and you can see in the background Western corporations, Western controlled institutions, UN volunteers, and all of these other groups that the US government and Europe are funding. Google, we know for a fact, works directly with the US State Department years before the Arab Spring to organize these type of color revolutions. Google is directly involved. Facebook, now called Meta, directly involved. Twitter, now X, also involved, also playing a part in this, doing at least at the minimum, doing nothing to expose and stop it. Another organization on that list, essentially backing the protests and condemning the Indonesian government and police, is an organization called Indonesia Justice and Peace Foundation. I will show it to you right here. Right here, Indonesia Justice and Peace Foundation. You just go through and you just spot check them. I guarantee you the majority of them are going to be US government funded. One way or the other, they'll be US government funded. And so what is the connection between Indonesia Justice and Peace Foundation and the US government? Well, they're openly collaborating with a group literally called American Friends Service Committee. And they pass themselves off as some religious organization, but of course they publish annual reports. You just go here and you click on 2024, and they have a whole list of organizations that are funding them. Named endowment. So you just go through these. You go through these and you just search each one. And I mean, an obvious one is right here, Tides Foundation, which is connected to Soros's Open Society. But I'm going to to show you how extensive all of this is. This network is extremely extensive. I will name you the organizations funding this religious front in America, located in America, supporting this group in Indonesia, backing the current protests. United Nations Peacebuilding Fund funds this American-based group supporting this Indonesian group. This is how they do it without being caught. They launder the money through various layers of public and private fronts. They know ordinary people are never going to take the time to trace back to their origin. So the United Nations Peacebuilding Fund is obvious. The US government captures and controls many aspects of the United Nations and its various funds. The Victims of Crime Act is literally a US federal government program. Go look it up. Kids in Need of Defense works directly with the US government, the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Health, legal and immigration systems. the US government's legal and immigration systems. The Community Alliance with Family Farmers. It receives federal grants from multiple US government agencies, including the Agricultural Marketing Service and the National Resources Conservation Service. And the list goes on and on and on. And you can do this. You can go and look these up, and you can see the US government is involved in absolutely every level of this. And they launder the money through layers to these organizations, hoping that nobody sees it. And they get angry when you see people calling it a US-sponsored color revolution. They say, it's not, it's organic, it's grassroots. When there is a stack of documents that if you printed them out, it would go to the ceiling, proving that this is US government funded. Now, who else? What other media? I said, always check the media groups. So let's check some media groups. Remotivi. This is based in Indonesia. Right here, it says Indonesia. Project Multatuli, Indonesia. Okay? And let's just take a look at some of their posts and see what they're saying. If you're familiar with this particular color revolution funded by the US government in Indonesia, and you see things like this, this is a Japanese anime series called One Piece. And if you're familiar with US funded color revolutions, especially because they target the youth, they always try to give it some sort of clever pop culture tie-in. So in Indonesia, it's One Piece. Here in Thailand, it was the Hunger Games and Harry Potter. In Myanmar, maybe because it is only one playbook and they were lazy that day, they also used the Hunger Games in Myanmar. So what does this post here say? It says, the mass action that has occurred since August 25th, 2025 is not solely due to the mouth, behavior, and policies of the DPR. They're complaining about the government. And this is basically saying it's not just about the housing allowances. It's about many other things. And that is how every US-sponsored color revolution works. They pick one thing that people would say, well, that's actually something you should be upset about. They take that and they use that as the pretext to get the protests going. They're always violent. Then they use the casualties as a reason to escalate and expand the protests. And then they start going into other things. And it always ends up with regime change. That is always the end goal, is regime change. Get whoever's in power out and get someone the US wants in power in. And this organization, Project Multatuli, and this one, Remotivi, both from Indonesia, both media organizations, we know for a fact that they are funded by the US National Endowment for Democracy because they themselves said so. We know that they are funded by the US government because they complained about it earlier this year. Without us, no scrutiny. Indonesia's independent media, there's that term again, count cost of US funding cuts. So if you're getting funded by the US government, you're not really independent media, are you? US funding cuts abruptly ended reporting initiatives on environmental issues in Indonesia affecting independent journalism outlets like Remotivi, New Narrative, and Project Multatuli. And I just showed you, they're both supporting the current protests. They're both sharing images with the One Piece flag. Let's go to the One Piece flag. And let's just make it even more obvious still. Here's a BBC article specifically about the cartoon symbol. How a cartoon skull became a symbol of defiance in Indonesia. And they've got a cute little article like this for every US engineered color revolution going all the way back to the Arab Spring. They had cute little articles like this about Thailand, about how they're using the Hunger Games and Harry Potter, and now it's One Piece. So it says, in the popular Japanese anime One Piece, black flags bearing a skull with a straw hat are carried by a rowdy crew of pirates who have been made in their mission to challenge a draconian regime and fight for freedom. So you could already see how that obviously was not these youths coming up with that themselves. It was a US government marketing team. The same one that comes up with these same, almost identical in concept symbols. Going all the way back to Serbia when they overthrew Milosevic, they had the clenched fist, and that was the graffiti symbol that they spray painted all across the country to identify the US funded regime change with. But in July, these emblems started popping up across Indonesia along doorways, on the back of cars, and painted on walls. And you can see the three-finger salute from Hunger Games still on cars and on people's shirts here in Thailand. It was a real successful branding exercise by the US government. And painted on walls, again, just like in Serbia, the clenched fist. For many, they were a response to the Indonesian leader. So they're talking about the president. He called on Indonesians to fly their national red and white flag ahead of the country's Independence Day on August 17th. Could you imagine your country was literally colonized by the West, who divided, destroyed, raped, and robbed your country for decades? You get independence from them, and then you're going to fly a one-piece pirate flag to spite your government on Independence Day for a movement that is literally funded by the same type of Western interests that colonized your country in the first place. And the West loves doing that. That's what they are still doing. That's what they have done for centuries. That is still what they're literally doing right now. It continues. Instead, some Indonesians chose to raise these pirate flags known as Jolly Rogers as a symbol of their discontent, with many criticizing what they say is an increasingly centralized government led by the presidents. But the movement has not been well received by all. Earlier last week, the country's deputy House Speaker criticized the flag displays, calling them an attempt to divide the nation, obviously. Another lawmaker even suggested it could be treason. Definitely. The whole point of these color revolutions, you will never see them be patriotic about their own country. It's always about creating a separate identity from what that country actually exists as, creating it separate and drawing more people over to it, and then pitting it against everyone else. And then creating a self-sustaining strategy of tension to burn the whole country to the ground. This is literally what the British Empire, and before that, the Roman Empire, did to regions and nations that it targeted for conquest. And that is what the United States is still doing. They're using the exact same tactics, albeit updated for the 21st century, and sharpened with modern marketing techniques. But that is what they are trying to do. So that's why they don't want Indonesians flying Indonesian flags on Independence Day. They want them flying a completely different flag. And other people are going to see that, and that's going to put them off, and it's going to create division. And that's exactly what you want. Why is Indonesia in the crosshairs of the United States yet again? They joined BRICS, and this president that they're trying to oust from power was supposed to be at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting this month. He had to cancel it because of the violent protests. This is straightforward as that. If a nation has an independent foreign policy, the United States government wants to crush it, wants to divide and destroy it, politically capture it if it can, but leave it as a failed state if it must. Because that is how one nation, one small group, handful of special interests can control the rest of the planet, by dividing and pitting everyone else against each other. Within a nation and between nations. Within a region and between regions. That is how empire has always functioned. That is how the modern American empire functions. And this is how they are doing it. I showed you the groups involved. I showed you their funding. I showed you the groups in Indonesia themselves admitting that they are independent media funded by the US government. Without US government money, they can't continue doing their work. How do they represent the average Indonesian if the Indonesian people themselves are not even willing to support their work? They have to get all their money from a foreign government, literally on the other side of the planet. Ask yourself that. So this is why every nation in the multipolar world needs to pass strict NGO laws that identify, defund, and dismantle these US and European funded networks. This is modern day imperialism, alive and well, and literally dividing and destroying countries around the world. Right now as we talk, Serbia and Indonesia, just two examples, and Venezuela is an example of the US just outright threatening it with overt military force and regime change. These nations also need to reform and protect their information space. I talk about information space as a modern domain of national security, just like your land border, your sea, your shores, and your airspace. Your information space is a national security domain that needs to be protected just as carefully as all of your physical domains. If you're not protecting your information space in the 21st century, it's the same as in the 20th century, not having an air force protecting your airspace. You will be easy prey for another nation's aggression and machinations. You also need to create pipelines to train lawyers, journalists, policymakers, and professors to reflect their nation's best interests, not the West's best interests. They should not be going over to the West and studying and then coming back, because what happens is they are indoctrinated, they are plugged into personal and professional social networks, and when they come back, they're still serving those networks and those interests from the West, not their own nation. So these pipelines need to be created inside these countries for these countries. And then from being educated in the country to reflect their own nation's best interests, you have to bring these people into the media, the legal system, and especially the education system, and of course the government itself of the country. You should not have foreign educated people running absolutely everything in a country in, say, Southeast Asia on the other side of the planet. It doesn't even make sense when you really think about it. Now, if protesters want to actually fight about something, let them fight about what that pipeline looks like, because that is how you fix the problems in your country. You create a pipeline that creates qualified people to do these jobs in the media, in education, and in the government. All of these things you complain are inadequate. You create a pipeline that creates qualified people that are actually capable of doing these jobs. You can fight over what that pipeline looks like and the type of people that it produces. What you do not do is go out into the streets and help burn your country down based on narratives and stories and accusations made by media organizations that admit themselves they're literally funded by the US government and cannot do their work without continued US government funding. And of course, they're obviously still being funded by the US government because they're still doing their work. And right now, their work is to promote these protests and attack the current Indonesian government. And the same goes for Serbia. And finally, most important, when you see these protests unfolding, do not try to listen to rhetoric and decipher Western media headlines. Identify the groups that are involved and follow where their funding leads back to. If it leads back to the National Endowment for Democracy, then case closed. It is a US government-sponsored color revolution. That is what's going on in Serbia and in Indonesia. Case closed. And you want to argue all that you want, that I don't like the president, he's a bad guy. That might be, but the US government is funding these protests, and they're burning these two countries down right now as we speak. Figure it out, expose it, speak up about it. If you want to see a brighter future for Serbia, Indonesia, or any other country for that matter, you need to stop the US from dismembering it first before they can go about solving any actual problem you think they have and moving forward in a better direction. I'm going to end it right there. I'm going to continue keeping an eye on all of these hotspots. Venezuela, Serbia, Indonesia, anywhere else US meddling rears its ugly head. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for all of the links that I referenced. All the NED funding I linked in the video description below. Check the video description below for all of those links. If you don't believe me, it's actually much more extensive than that. This is as much as I can fit into a video. There are also ways you can help support my work. Unlike all of these fake media groups in Serbia and in Indonesia, I'm not funded by a foreign government. I solely depend on my audience to support my work. They are very generous in supporting my work. I greatly appreciate that. You can do that through Buy Me a Coffee or through Patreon, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or if you don't have any resources at all, please don't apologize for not being able to support me financially. Just helping share my work and getting the word out there about all of this information, that is help enough. I greatly appreciate all of that. All of that is what makes this work possible. So thank you again. And as always, thank you for watching.